What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the vlog. This is going to be episode number 12. In this video, we're playing 1-2 at Turning Stone in upstate New York. For those of you who don't know, Turning Stone is one of the largest casinos in the upstate New York area, and we played there quite a bit this summer while we were living up there. Didn't necessarily do any vlogs while I went up there. They don't allow filming, but on this particular night, I did take very good notes on all of the hands that I played. So we're going to recap some of them today. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe for more on the way, and let's get into it. Today we're at Turning Stone in upstate New York. We're going to buy into the 1-2 game. Max buy-in's $200. We might hop into the 1-3 depending on how the night goes. Whether or not the 1-2 game is good or if it's just a bunch of limps, we might try and move up, play some 1-3. We're just going to feel it out. It's a Friday night, so hopefully the action's good. I can't film in there, so I'm going to try and recap some hands using the new editing style that I've been using. So hopefully my notes are good enough and we can get some good hands out of this session. If you enjoy what you see, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content on the way. And let's hop into some hands and turn some sand into gold. Walking into this place, you can really feel the degenerate energy radiating through the building. They even got this beautiful glass sculpture to welcome you on your walk in. I'm thinking about buying one of these for my own personal home game. If this video gets like 10,000 likes, I think we can make that happen. We walk into the Turning Stone poker room and get seated almost immediately. Once we get seated, our first significant hand comes at 11:15 p.m. We pick up Queen 10 offsuit. We've got an under the gun raise to $5 and a +1 call. I call somewhere in middle position. The cutoff also calls, as does the small blind, so we're going 5 ways to a flop. The flop comes 10-3 deuce with 2 spades and a heart, and going 5 ways in one of the first hands that you sit down is always a little bit uncomfortable with no active reads on any players. On this flop, we see the small blind check it over to the under the gun raiser, and he c-bets here for $5. The old man in +1 calls, as do I. Cutoff gets out of the way, and the small blind calls, so we're now 4 ways to the turn. Yeah, first hand of the night, we're pretty much just playing 4-man bingo here, but that's the beauty of 1-2 live poker. The turn comes the deuce of diamonds, which really doesn't change anything. I don't really think that many players would be calling the flop with a deuce. Maybe the small blind would at small frequency, like deuce 3 or something like that. But for the most part, it's a pretty safe turn card. The small blind checks once again. The under the gun player fires a very small bet of $5. The old man in +1 calls, as do I, as does the small blind. So we're still going 4 ways to the river here. Let's get weird. The river brings in the 8 of diamonds, and once again, I still feel pretty confident about my hand. Some of the opponents here could have pocket 8s. As played, that would make some sense, I think, but for the most part, I don't think anybody has a deuce, just because of the overall passivity on the flop and the turn. Typically, people play their hands very face-up in live poker, and I think if someone had a deuce or a set that turned into a boat, they would very quickly be raising this hand up. So I'm pretty confident with my Queen 10. We might lose to like King 10 or Ace 10 at some frequency, but for the most part, I'm feeling good about it. On this river, the small blind player now checks it over to the under the gun player, who now checks. This is a really good sign for us. He had the perceived strongest range of hands, and he's now essentially giving up with this check, and the old man in +1 position bets $20, and one of the only reads I had thus far was this player and his $20 bet on the river. He has done this twice in the past with absolutely nothing. So when he does this, I'm pretty confident that it's just a little gimmicky bluff. And we're going to put in the call for 20 here. Everyone else folds. Old man flips over pocket 4s, and we are good against that. We scoop the pot here. Pretty good start to the session at Turning Stone. Next hand of the night, we pick up Ace-King offsuit in the big blind. We see an under-the-gun limp to $2, a middle position call, and a call out of the small blind. Obviously, we're going to be squeezing things up with this hand here. It is too good to just check, and we don't want to go 4 ways with Ace-King. We want to put money in with our premium hands and try and get value. So we raise it on up to $20. The under-the-gun limper calls, the middle position player gets out of the way, and the small blind calls, so we're going 3 ways to a flop with about $60 in the middle. The flop comes Ace Queen 3 with 2 clubs, so a really good flop for our hand. And to make matters even better, the small blind now donk jams for $150. This is actually quite the interesting spot here because as played, he really can't have aces or queens, or even ace queen for that matter, so he could have ace 3, queen 3, or potentially pocket 3s for hands that are beating us, and aside from that, we're just ahead of his entire range. So it is kind of uncomfortable to just put 150 bucks in here and see what happens, but ultimately that's what we do. We stick in the call, and once we put our money in, the under the gun limper snap shoves the last $24 in his stack in. That's never a good sign, right? We flip over our hands. I have ace king. The small blind also has ace king, and the under the gun limp has ace 3 offsuit for flopped 2 pair. Yeah, this is just classic 1-2 poker at its finest right here. I honestly don't know why the small blind player was just limp calling with ace king. That really doesn't make any sense at all. And the ace 3 offsuit getting in there for 20 bucks is always a fun sight to see as well. We run it out and we do not beat ace 3, so we chop the side pot with ace king and lose the main to the ace 3. We quickly add on for another $100. And honestly, this is just a really frustrating hand, a prime example of why 1-2 games are so bad. Next hand of the night, we pick up queen 9 of diamonds from the cutoff. We see 2 early position limps, and I raise things up to $10. In hindsight, I should probably be going a bit bigger here, trying to fold out more hands, because we don't want to go multi-way, obviously. After I raise things to $10, the button, the small blind, and one of the early position limpers calls, so we're going 4 ways to a flop. The flop comes queen jack 5 rainbow board. It checks over to me, and I pretty quickly bet $10 here. Going 4 ways, we're going to be betting all of our top pairs with a small size, I think. However, we probably could size up a bit more than usual here because this board does contain multiple combinations of straight draws. But that being said, we bet $10 and the button and the small blind come along, so we're going 3 ways to a turn. The turn rolls off the ace of clubs, and I really don't know how many ace-high floats people are going to have in their range. So because of that, when it checks to me, I bet $25 here. The button gets out of the way, and the small blind calls. The river comes the inconsequential 6 of spades. He checks it on over to me, and I'm pretty confident that my hand is good. However, if we put in a value bet on the river here, we really don't get value from anything that we are beating. I think all Jack X combos will fold to a value bet. So there's really no value to be gotten here. It was honestly kind of thin to bet the turn for value as is. So we check things back and we lose to ace 9 offsuit, which is just a random float on the flop. I'm not really sure why he had that. Maybe it was a little spewy to go for value on the turn, but I really didn't think he had much ace-x in his range, so this was just a really strange hand, and once again, just another frustrating hand playing low stakes 1-2. Next hand of the evening, we pick up Jack 9 of diamonds in the cutoff. We raise things up to $7 and we get called from the small blind and the big blind, so we're going 3 ways to a flop. The flop comes very solid for us, 9-4 deuce rainbow board. We have top pair, reasonable kicker, so yeah, certainly a good start for us on this one. The small blind checks and the big blind now donks for $15. This player is a young kid and it seems like for the most part, he's pretty uncomfortable playing 1-2. He bought in for like $70, so I'm definitely putting him on a tighter image and I don't expect him to be bluffing all that much. When he bets 15, we just call and the small blind folds, so we're heads up to the turn. The turn comes the 6 of spades, doesn't really change anything. Brings in some straight draws and backdoor flush draws, but I don't really see him donking any of that on the flop, so I'm not too worried about it. The big blind now leads for $35 off of about 60 in his stack, and I'm really not in love with this spot, but I think when he puts this amount of money in, we're not going to be folding, so we just put the rest of it in here for $60. He pretty quickly calls with queens, and we do not improve, so we lose $82 out of our stack. Pretty frustrating here to just run into queens. I'm surprised that he didn't 3-bet pre-flop, so we kind of just got trapped here. We quickly add on for another $100, and we're now in the game for $400. Yeah, so thus far this session really isn't going how we planned it to. We're getting in some uncomfortable spots, really not running all that great. Stuck a good amount of money so far, and overall just pretty frustrated. You could say I'm a tiny bit tilted, but yeah, for the most part, just not doing well. Next hand of the evening, we pick up King Jack suited. We see 2 limps from early position players, and I raise things up to $12 from the hijack. Once again, I probably should be going a little bit bigger here, but I think the $12 size is fine, given the current game dynamic. We see a small blind call who's an extremely face-up player. Older man, and really doesn't do anything out of the ordinary, plays his hands very straightforward. So he calls our 12, and then the 2 early position limps get out of the way. So we're heads up with this older gentleman in position. The flop comes 5-5-3 rainbow board. I'm not really in love with this flop, but I do think it will be pretty easy to navigate given that our opponent is very face up, very straightforward. so we should be able to just figure out where we're at pretty quickly. We bet $15 and he calls. This is good news for us because if he does have a 5, I do believe that he will be raising it almost always. So I'm not too worried that he has us crushed with any 5x. At this point in time, I'm putting him on hands such as 3x and then maybe middling pocket pairs such as 6s through 9s, maybe pocket 10s as well, but anything better he would be 3-betting pre-flop. We bet $15 and he calls. We're going to the turn. The turn comes the Queen of Spades, and I think this is a good card for me in the sense that I'll have more Queen Jack, Ace Queen, King Queen, things of that nature. So when he checks it over to us, I'm really looking to just put middling pocket pairs and then some 3x in a tough spot. Maybe he even has some Queen X, which we're going to continue to put in a tough spot as well. He checks, and I bet $40, and after some deliberation, he calls our bet on the turn, and we're headed to a river. The river comes the King of Hearts, so we now improve to top pair. It's always a very interesting spot when you are just bluffing the whole way, and then you arrive to the river with top pair. In real time, I was very unsure with what kind of size I wanted to go with here. I really wasn't sure that he was very strong at all, so part of me wanted to bet pretty small here and just target hands like 6s through 9s like I mentioned earlier. Perhaps 3x. Sort of unlikely that he has Queen X, but I think a smaller size would absolutely still call with Queen X. But after thinking about it for a while, I decided to just go all in here, try and go for all of it. My table image really isn't that great this session. I'm definitely playing on the aggressive side. I've been putting money in the middle, splashing around a good amount. So I don't think this player will believe me when I go all in. So that being said, when I move all in here, I'm just hoping that this player really doesn't believe me. He calls me with maybe a queen, maybe a 3, or some sort of middling pocket pair. So yeah, we go for it all here. Max value. He tanks for a good long while, and eventually he makes the fold. Didn't end up finding out what he had, but it was certainly an interesting spot. We pick up a nice pot here and add some chips to the stack. After this hand, we pick up a few more reasonable sized pots with queens and queen jack suited, adding some much needed chips to our chip stack, continuing to chip up and work in the right direction. After these hands go by, a new player joins our table. He's bald, he's extremely sweaty, like physically sweating at the table, and he's very unkind to the majority of the players, always berating them after making calls, telling them that they stink. Overall, very indecent human being. And he's also splashing around quite a bit, playing almost every hand, bluffing at a high frequency. So we have our sights set on taking some of his chips. In this next hand, we pick up 7-5 of clubs in the small blind. Not a great hand, but it definitely has potential. We see an under the gun raise to $11, the hijack calls, and the button calls. I call in the small blind, so does the big blind, so we're going 5 ways to a flop. The flop comes Ace-7-3, rainbow board, so we have a piece of it. Not really anything to write home about, but a piece nonetheless. The sweaty bald man in under the gun position checks. I think if he ever had an ace here, he would definitely be betting it going 5 ways. And after he checks, the entire table checks around and we take a free turn. The turn comes the queen of clubs, so it doesn't really change much. If anything, it just makes our position in this hand worse, given we now have third pair instead of second pair. Myself and the big blind check, and the sweaty under the gun player bets $20. It folds around to me, and I'm not ready to fold my pair just yet. It is in fact very hard to make a pair in this game, and against this player who has been splashing a good amount, I think our 7 could be good sometimes. The big blind folds, and we're heads up. The river comes another 3, and it really doesn't change anything on this board. I check for a third time, and the sweaty bald man now bets $35 into us. My immediate thoughts on this hand was this seemed very bluffy. I think he would certainly bet an ace on the flop going 5 ways, so I can't really give him any credit for that. Additionally, I think that if he had a queen, he would probably check back on the river because it seems a little bit too thin to go for 2 streets of value with just second pair. So given all of this information, plus the player's very active table image, I stick in the hero call with 7-5 here, and he says, "You're good." We flip over our pair of 7s, and he immediately berates us for being a terrible player. It's always good fun getting back at guys like this and stealing some of their money whenever you get the opportunity. After this hand, we pick up a few more small pots, and we're now unstuck on the session. At around 2 o'clock in the morning, we pick up King Jack suited and +1. We see an under the gun raise to $8. I just call. We get a middle position call as well, and the button now squeezes things up very small to $20. The under the gun player calls, and it gets back over to me, and for this price, I am never folding this hand, although it is always uncomfortable facing a very small 3-bet in a 1-2 game. Typically, that's indicative of hands like aces, kings, maybe ace-king, but nonetheless, we're going to put in the call, and so does the middle position player, so we are going 4 ways to a flop with 80 bucks in the middle. We get a flop of king 9-8, two-tone board. The under the gun player starts with a check, and I'm not going to blast off with this hand just yet. We're going to check and flow, and it actually checks all the way around, so we get to play a free turn card. The turn comes the 5 of diamonds, and thus far we've underplayed our hand very much. The under the gun player bets $20, and I think just a call here is fine. I'm really not sure where I'm at, and going 4 ways, it does seem a bit uncomfortable to just raise here, so we just call the 20. The middle position player calls as well. The button jams for 75 bucks. Gets back over to the under the gun player, and he rejams for like $500. He had us covered. I tank for a while, and I'm going to play under the assumption that neither of these players are very capable of bluffing. Once one player is already all in, the guy rejamming should never really have a bluff. That would make 0 sense. The older man who put in $75 does seem to be kind of on the tight side. I don't really give him any credit for running a massive bluff going 4 ways. So this seems like a pretty easy fold. We lay down our hand, and then it gets to showdown. We see the button had pocket 8s, and the under the gun player had 6-7 suited, so we just ran into some monsters here, and fortunately enough, as played, we kind of lost the minimum. We lose 40 bucks, really not that big of a deal. We could have had it way worse. On to the next hand. And the final hand of the evening, we pick up ace-king offsuit in the $4 straddle. Disregard this graphic here. I couldn't put any straddles into the hand replayer, but we are playing 1-2-4. I'm in the straddle. We see 2 early position limps. The game's now only 7-handed. It's starting to die down a bit. After the 2 limps, the big blind limps in as well, and with this hand, we're obviously squeezing things up here. We make it 25 to go. The 2 early position limps quickly fold, and the big blind now blasts his whole stack into the middle, covering us. He's got like 600 in his stack. Super strange play here. Don't really know what to make of this. This player has been kind of clicking buttons a little bit. He's not super sharp at the game, I'd say, but at the same time, he also doesn't get egregiously out of line. This is the player with the $20 bluffs on the river that we have noticed to sort of be a theme. So I wouldn't say he's a good player, but I also wouldn't say he's getting extremely out of line. We tank for a bit, and we ultimately decide that we can't fold ace-king here for about $300. It's just too good of a hand. We put in the money, and as soon as we put it in, this player hits us with the good ol', "Oh damn, you actually did have a real hand." That's always a good sign for us. We flip over our ace-king, and he's nice enough to show that he has queen-jack offsuit, so he clearly didn't believe us that we had a strong hand once we squeezed out of the straddle. We run things once here, and we hold against queen-jack to scoop a gigantic pot and give us some profit on the night. Obviously, catching large punts like this is the easiest way to save your session and even make a little bit of money to go on top of it. After this hand, we played for like 20 minutes before the game completely broke and the casino turned into a ghost town. So we walked away with a solid profit on this one. Alright, session's over. After I won that big hand with ace-king, there's like 2 guys that left the table. They went to the 1-3 game. Just the poker room as a whole kind of turned into like a ghost town towards the end. It's obviously 3 a.m. and people are starting to wrap up, go home. So kind of sucks that we had to hit and run there, but I don't really feel too bad about it. Everybody left anyways. So we were in the game for 400, out for 565, so a profit of 165 bucks. Played for like 4.5 hours. We got a 40-minute drive home, so that kind of sucks too, but what are you going to do? Overall, not a bad session. Action wasn't great tonight for a Friday night. I thought it would be a little bit better, but yeah, you can't really control the action at the casino. You kind of just have to find a good table and roll with it, and our table was all right. It was pretty soft, but not any huge whales, so we couldn't really get much going. We also didn't run extremely well either. But yeah, overall, not the best night ever, not the worst night. Good to book a win. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed the vlog, make sure to like and subscribe for more videos on the way. Until next time, Dookie Bets.